Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 5th planning meeting of the Pine-Richland School Board. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we take roll, on behalf of the entire Pine-Richland School District family, we'd like to take a moment of silence in remembrance of former maintenance employee Ron Keebler, who passed away on January 22nd, 2018, and former teacher George Clark, who passed away on January 23rd, 2018. While employed in our district, Mr. Keebler was our in-house HVAC expert. He was also a member of the Free and Accepted Masons of Punxsutawney, the Shriners, and the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Pittsburgh. After 14 years of service in this district, Mr. Keebler recently retired in September of 2017. Mr. Clark was a teacher at Pine-Richland for 40 years and had retired in 1997. He enjoyed many hobbies and spending time with his grandchildren. Our condolences and thoughts are with the Keebler and Clark families at this time. Please join me in a moment of silence in their remembrance. Thank you all. Ms. Williams, roll call, please.
Mr. Lyons?
Here.
Ms. Misbach?
Here.
Mr. Kashani?
Here.
Dr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. DiTullio?
Here.
Mrs. Goebel?
Here.
Dr. Meyer?
Here.
Dr. Mihalik?
Here.
Mr. Moy?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 1.02, recognition of visitors. If anyone would like to address the board. Moving to item 1.03, Ms. Williams.
No correspondence has been received.
Thank you. Item 1.04 is a motion to approve the meeting minutes as attached.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes. Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2.01, strategic plan update. Dr. Miller.
Okay, we are more than halfway through the year, so this is the time where we have given the board and community just a high-level update of our key strategic initiatives for the year. So we did the first about a quarter of the way through. We are now at the halfway point. For the new board members, we try to write these so that someone not familiar with it could read them and get a sense of what's happening and what the district has viewed as very important. Very important is based on the scope of the initiative. So the in-depth program review, for example, has the impact across those departments, across our district, and hopefully for many years to come as we improve what it is that we're doing. So those items are here. We won't read them to you, but each senior leadership team member who's a point person will share just a few comments, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions. This information is shared with our parent community, with our staff community. Everybody gets these updates. Mike and Kristen, if you want to share anything about the in-depth process.
Okay, so the first is the in-depth program review for mathematics, business, computer science. Again, we established that process last year. We have refined that process this year with the departments of business, computer science, and math. We just finished last week. We had a number of interviews with local businesses, with universities, with our identified exemplar school districts. That's where we identify our research buckets. We design questions around those buckets, and then we reach out to those organizations to gather some additional insight, which is extremely valuable for the committee. And then that information, along with our research team, helps to inform our emerging recommendations. So when we get into the month of March, that'll be our focus. We'll shift to lifting out those emerging recommendations We like to get community and student involvement, so we will be promoting a town hall opportunity for community members to participate in the math and business computer science in-depth program review. We have those scheduled for beginning of March, so we'll be getting those advertisements out soon. And then what we've done with student input is we do some focus groups. So students in grade 6, students in grade 8, and some high school students are invited to come and provide some student perspective on those programs, and again, around those different buckets of research that we're looking at, and that would inform our written report that we'd provide to the board. So we have a committee meeting that we'll hold at some point later in the spring, and we'll give all the details of those recommendations coming out of those committees.
And coinciding with that process, we also have the K-5 textbook review for mathematics, so we're in the process of doing that a week from Friday this week. We'll be looking at those vendors' resources, picking back up where we had in that second round, so that'll continue, and we'll keep you informed as that progresses as well.
The second one
Just
is...
real quick, so we were on with an exemplar school district, one of the most interesting calls we've had in this 2-year process. As we're discussing mathematics, we ask a number of questions, as many as we can without them hanging up the phone because they're irritated. And one of the components is around resources. We asked this district, what resources they're using. They said, well, we just went through a process. We narrowed down to, top 4, and then we moved. They're piloting 2 different resources right now, which is a different discussion. But their top 4 match exactly with the top 4 math resources that worked through our committee. So again, it's that extra sort of validation in terms of what we're seeing, looking at, and what our staff is seeing is sort of a side benefit that comes out of this process.
So the second key initiative is really the other side of the in-depth program review, which is the implementation of those recommendations. So again, last year we worked through this same process with science, health, and physical education. This year is the work of the implementation of those recommendations. So we provide an update of the progress that we've made. Some of those recommendations are, what we'd call complete. They've been implemented. Some are a work in progress, and some we are just starting to formulate the action plans for those for those recommendations. So we feel good about the progress, though. We are halfway through the first school year after the report was provided. So we feel like we're in a good place with the implementation of those recommendations. For example, the one that we've been spending a lot of time is the rewrite of the curriculum for health in grades 8 and 9. We found a lot of overlap within that curriculum when we did the study, and our staff has been working hard to differentiate clearly between those 2 courses. So now it's the back mapping K through 7 of the gaps in health instruction that need to occur K to 7, and then moving up past grade 9, where do we fill those gaps for some learning opportunities for students past. So it's a good process, a lot of different people involved. We have involved our building level administrators, department chairs, grade level chairs, and some random teachers within each of those departments as well.
Moving on into the teaching and learning universal screeners, we have both the STAR 360 assessment that we utilized this year. We just gave that second benchmark here in January and have a nice set of data to look at, most of which is reflecting growth for individual students over time, which is the trend that we're hopeful to see. As we give that assessment 3 times a year, it will get tighter and tighter around the students' performance cluster because it is computer adaptive. So as they answer those questions correctly, the instruction or the questions become a little more difficult. As they miss them, it drops down a level so that we really have an understanding of where that child's range of learning is. We're at the point where we are now able to take that data and the results that we obtain and look at the instructional planning reports. That's the next step in the process. So we have an in-service upcoming on the 19th, and the K-6 staff will be spending some time face-to-face again with a trainer from Renaissance to understand the linkage between those results and the instructional planning tools that come with the system itself. So we're hoping to develop the proficiency in the teachers to be able to differentiate at Tier 1 as well as what happens in Tier 2 and 3 when they qualify for interventions. And a piece of this has been working with the district data committee, which is comprised of principals from every building, reading specialists, gifted personnel, special education, and taking a look at how the data we're gaining is matching up to that decision tree, because we had redesigned that at the start of the year and marked where we thought that those good cutoffs would be, and hoped that the students' intervention process would show results of growth from that. And we are seeing that to date. There's a lot of buy-in from the staff in terms of the tool itself, and we're able to take the data from these assessments as well as the PSSAs and other standardized measures and upload those into Performance Plus, which is our in-house data warehouse, and we can run reports against each of those measures to have a more robust sense of how the students are performing. So that's going very well. In addition, we added the cognitive abilities test this year for students in grades 2 and 5, and we gave that assessment in November. And again, that gives us information about the students' relative ability levels and can give us information to dive in a little deeper to see if students qualify potentially for gifted services or enrichment programs. We revised the matrices to include both the COGAT data points as well as the STAR 360 data, so that those are now reflected as we look at students for identification purposes.
Actually, Dave, if they're going to go through the K through 12 and the device deployment, I can wait till the end.
No, that's good now.
Okay. On the revision to the gifted matrices, we went through these in detail about 3 years ago. I think it was substantial amount of detail. I wonder if a refresh and how the new screeners are being used in the spring for academic achievement wouldn't be in order. So I think it was just a topic of conversation earlier. So I'm not sure how other members feel, or if you wanted to see. So
I would agree with that. Just to refresh and see how they all fit together would probably be wise.
Yeah, so I would add to that, I think that's a good component of the meeting, but then we want to move into the more significant step, which is once or when and if identified, then how are the educational programs and services being delivered? What does that look like? How does it fit within the philosophy of gifted education? And so, again, agreed. We'll schedule something. Mr. Stobener?
Thank you. Continuing our work on technology integration, on January 15th, a in-service day was held where teachers were able to select a specific in-service. The sessions were surveyed on earlier in the year of areas of focus. Many of the teachers have indicated their level of expertise and could select a session based upon their interest in what was applicable to what was going on in their classroom. It was very successful. We had some very positive feedback. Additionally, we're continuing to look into other areas of focus with cybersecurity, including different avenues for education and best practices of cybersecurity as well. And jumping back to the in-service day, the in-service day was a full 3.25-hour session. So it allowed for teachers to actually get in there and practice what they had learned in that session. And that was done from feedback from previous in-service days, so that teachers could actually leave the session with a work product or something that they could use in the classroom the following week. So we felt very positive about that approach, and moving forward, we're excited for our next technology service and focus, or our next technology-focused and service day as well.
I'd add a couple of things. The other is professional development and technology outside of the in-service schedule, so a calendar goes out about that, and there are different options for staff members. Building level technology coaches, the BLTCs, can deliver some of that. The one area of this one that I want to highlight again, and we've seen it even in K-12 education in the last, I would say, 18 months, more every day, is around cybersecurity. So Mrs. Kirk, for example, is looking at potential insurance options around cybersecurity. Mr. Stobener's team work on the hardening of the back-end infrastructure. But one of the other components that we have to be aware of is even staff behavior. And how do we the staff, how do we make decisions that are going to keep us from being vulnerable to phishing schemes and other things that are out there. So all of that is a part of the cybersecurity piece. Mr. Stober and his team are looking at how can we can handle some of it without a lot of engagement, but some of it does require the engagement of our staff and training, and how do we make that work. So that is on our radar, and hopefully we'll take steps before the end of this year. We have examples of this all the time. Mrs. Kirk has received multiple email, for example, purportedly from me around financial information that are not from me, and require her to read, check, and get in touch with me and see, is this something that's legitimate? No. And then we're able to share that information and work through that. So there are certain areas of our organization, finance department being a big one, that are vulnerable to this. Good. Okay.
All right, the next one, key initiative, is around developing a step-by-step guide for common assessments. That work has started. We have a smaller committee. You see there are about 11 members of that committee across K-12 grade span. Again, some administrators, some central office administrators. And the goal there is to really build a clear understanding of what are common assessments, and most importantly, how will we use common assessments in classrooms to support student learning, to improve construction, to improve our curriculum. So we are about ready to roll out our introductory podcast that would go out to all of our teachers K through 12, give them a nice overview of common assessments. We do have pockets of teachers that have developed something, but we talk about the right level of challenge and rigor that are built into those assessments. And then, again, back to how you use the information. We have a group of students that all take the same assessment. You score that, and you use that information to drive what's next, both for individual students, groups of students, instruction, and curriculum. It's a really powerful resource. And we want to build a guide, because we're going to ask across every department and every course for those common assessments to be integrated into the curriculum. That's one area, if you recall, with our framework of the curriculum that was left blank. The big ideas, the learning goals, learning activities are now embedded into that framework, and that missing piece now is that common assessment. So that's going to be rolled out over the course of this second semester.
I would add, I placed this in my update within the last month, I believe. The board will see that podcast as well. It's incredibly well done, informative, maybe 9-10 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, right around.
Right around 9. Again, a linkage to the in-depth program review. As we talk to some of the exemplary schools, one of the emerging findings, themes that we see, is the amount of time and energy they've placed into locally developed assessments that are commonly given at various points of class, and how their teams of teachers are utilizing those results to make decisions. So we were on this path before we were contemplating in-depth program review. It's validation to us that as we get to this point, we know that the direction we're headed is only being reinforced by those that we're speaking with. So pretty positive news. Noel?
As we continue to build upon our multi-tiered systems of supports, this year we're focusing on formalizing our process for meeting the needs of gifted and highly achieving learners through that MTSS process. And the approach this year is to follow the podcast idea. And what we're doing is breaking it down into 4 smaller podcasts. The first, we want to ensure that everybody has a strong understanding of what the MTSS process is. And this is important because many general education teachers, they're not in it every day, so we felt that it was important to begin by ensuring that there's that we strengthen the level of understanding among everybody. From there, we're going to move into the gifted piece of it, and give an overview of the relationship between MTSS and gifted and highly achieving learners. And add in there a bit about Chapter 16 and how it relates and what the requirements are to a school district. After that, we'll get into some specific tiered interventions for accelerated and gifted learners, some specific examples of what types of strength-based interventions should occur at a Tier 1, a Tier 2, a Tier 3, and then finally, the identification of gifted learners. What triggers that evaluation from, an internal aspect? What kind of information are we looking at? What kind of database decisions are we going to make before we recommend an evaluation for giftedness?
Okay. So this ties in with what we were discussing before. Okay. Is it Mr. Stobener?
Yeah, certainly not the most exciting thing on the list, but an aspect that touches or impacts every aspect of the district and every classroom is our managed print service agreement. We are just under 1 year away from the expiration of the current RICO print contract that has been in place for many years. So we have a group put together that is currently reviewing some documents. They have already been blessed by the solicitor's office, and we have aligned several organizations that we felt strongly could support a contract that we currently have, or the size of a contract that we currently have. Again, 24 million impressions of paper pass through Pine-Richland every year, accounting between 400 and 500,000. So it's a large order as far as items are concerned, and has a huge impact of how our teachers deliver content and material to our students. So we're hoping to have the packet of information released to the vendors within a week, and we will begin the process of having them evaluate where our devices are, the age of devices, and coming forward with a recommendation. We do have a meeting scheduled in, I believe it is April, in April, and we will be listening to approximately 4 to 6 vendors give their recommendation for replacement print services just over 10 months from now.
Mr. Stovener, is print-on-demand linked to Employees ID being considered still at all as part of this? I know we had some casual conversation about it.
It is in the spec for the vendors for consideration. I think it is something that will need to be done to kind of help manage print services. Currently, we have a lot of visibility into how many pages come off of a printer, but not necessarily what disciplines are printing, what paper, and what, necessarily, we don't have the granularity that we would like. So that is written in there.
I know it's only anecdotal, but when it was implemented in my office, the number shot down dramatically, just because sometimes people print things, but then they move on and deal with it online, realize they don't need the hard copy, and it just never gets printed because they never walked up and said, okay, I'm here now, print this, so. Thank you. Really appreciate the comprehensive updates, and would encourage board members, if anything, you have a question in reading through these, be sure to contact the administration or the administrator, in this case, who presented it. We have 2 action items that are somewhat time sensitive this evening. The first is item 3.01, personnel action, motion to approve the personnel and supplemental positions as listed.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Just want to make sure the board is aware that there was a supplemental position of stage manager added to the supplemental list late this afternoon. We just got the clearances, everything in today, but because the musical is already underway, we didn't want to wait until the February 19th meeting. So just want to make sure that was brought to everybody's attention before the vote.
Thank you, Mr. All those in favor say yes.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.02 is a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement between Pine-Richland and Mars area school districts for a crosstown Air Force Junior ROTC program as attached. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Dr. Miller, could you give us some background how this came about?
Sure. We're very excited this is on the agenda for board consideration. We have had a Air Force Junior ROTC unit here for a number of years. One of the requirements of a unit is to meet a certain threshold, what they call a viability number, and that's the number of cadets involved. And for schools, for our school, 100 is the minimum number. So it's either a percentage of the student body or 100, whatever is lower. We have been largely in the 60s. I think 71 maybe was our best number. But we have struggled to get past, is that right? Exactly. 71, okay. We've struggled to get past that threshold. The quality of our program is outstanding. The impact of our program, not only on the cadets involved, but really in the whole school community, has been tremendous. But unfortunately, the regulations are the regulations. There is no changing the regulations. We have been on probation for a period of years, and our staff has attempted a number of initiatives to try to increase interest exposure, the program of studies process being flexible with when and how students take other courses in order to try to make it work. And we just seem to have found that place around 60 or 70 cadets. So we received notice that at the end of this year, the unit would be deactivated. That led to conversation with the U.S. Air Force, those who oversee this, to really ask if there was any other options. And the last option was this concept of a crosstown agreement. And as it was being proposed to us by the U.S. Air Force as sort of the last option, they also were very clear in that it was very difficult to make something like this work, and there have not been a lot of successful high school examples of that happening, just because of logistics involved. Following that conversation, I talked to Dr. Shipley at Mars. He had been with another district prior, and he had had ROTC on his mind for a number of years. We almost couldn't be closer to another high school than we are to Mars High School. So the fact that we had a so close proximity to a school that would have the same viability threshold that we do if they were to try to institute their own program of 100, and they're smaller than we are. This looked like a possibility and quickly got traction with the administration, and as he communicated with the board and some of the staff at Mars, the same thing happened. Earlier in January, we had some representatives attend at Mars. Our officers and some of our cadets presented. Dr. Pasquinelli was there, Mr. Lyons was there, and it was well received. The crosstown agreement has to meet certain requirements. So the MOA that you see here tonight addresses the required elements of an agreement that must be put in place. This agreement would give our unit, so it's the Pine-Richland unit. It's not the Pine-Richland / Mars unit. So as far as the Air Force is concerned, it's the Pine-Richland unit to increase numbers based upon interested cadets who attend high school at Mars. But when they are driven here, they become Pine-Richland cadets. That's the way it is structured. And so the 60-some or 70 Pine-Richland cadets grow to hopefully greater numbers in order to continue to meet the viability or to approach that viability threshold of 100 cadets. So that sort of was the basis of this. In terms of the program, the critical elements are outlined here. Most important is that the students from Mars are enrolled in the courses. They receive credit. That credit goes on their transcript. That's a requirement of the process. Mars School District is fully responsible to get the kids here for the course. And so we'll look at the bell schedules. The principals will work together. We believe the end of the day makes the most sense, and they're working through some of those details. But it would likely be an instructional period near the end of the current day here where Mars students come over on the bus, get off the bus, come in to must be face-to-face, couldn't be online or through any other mechanism, face-to-face instruction with the chief and the major in the coursework. For us, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the number of instructional periods. It doesn't change any factor in how we deliver our program. We'll be able to continue to deliver the program. It doesn't impact our costs. So our costs are not impacted by as long as they're covering transportation, which is spelled out in the MOA, there's no additional cost for the students to participate here. And the Air Force provides some of the other, the uniforms and some of the other resources. As kids are involved in various field trips or other opportunities, again, U.S. Air Force contributes towards that. So do the cadets through fundraising and other activities similar to many of the extracurricular groups that we have at Pine-Richland. One of the questions that was discussed briefly was around the future. And again, what we're most hopeful for is a future that involves the ROTC program and that has the viability numbers necessary to continue because the quality is so important. But this would be something that we would need to revisit in a couple of years, assuming we continue to make progress and there's an appetite for this from the students at Mars, to, again, revisit the MOA, talk about any other potential considerations in how things are scheduled. But again, that's the crux of this. All of the extracurricular things, drill teams, some of the trips, they are not required. They're optional. But that work does occur after school here. So if they're coming over for the end of the day, they would have the ability to stay and be a part of drill teams. And just like every opportunity afforded to the cadets at Pine-Richland would be afforded to a Mars to Pine-Richland cadet. So that's the basic overview. And we did review this MOA with the U.S. Air Force. They said it was well written, and they appreciated the manner in which it was written. Mars would plan to act on this same MOA tomorrow at their next board, which is their next board meeting. Any questions?
If there are trips scheduled for our students, like we have some upcoming trips that our Air Force students are going to, is there cost sharing then for travel if the Mars students are going as well, or how does that work out?
Right. So again, the cost would be, there would be no additional cost to Pine-Richland. So for the current year, there wouldn't be involved in any trips at all. So this would be for, the timing of this is important because they're in their program of studies process just like we are, and students need to know that this is a course offering an opportunity for them. So that's what would occur. When it comes to dollars that are not covered through, let's say, the U.S. Air Force, then it would be the responsibility, I'll call them Mars cadets for clarity. There'll be Pine-Richland cadets, but it would be the responsibility of those families and fundraising and cadets to raise money for trips if those costs exist.
Okay.
It just depends on the trip.
I think we've approved some cost for their travel.
We have in some budgeted costs that I think are in there, yeah.
Okay. And do we know the level of interest at Mars? How many students might be?
We do not have a number, no. And we also were not given a number by the U.S. Air Force. In other words, it doesn't have to be X in order for that to continue. So my impression in discussions with the Air Force is that they will give this time. Just as they've given us probationary time to try to increase numbers, they will give this arrangement time because they understand it takes time.
And if this doesn't work out, we don't get enough students from Mars, is there the opportunity for a crosstown agreement with North Allegheny since they have a functioning chapter? Have we
it would not be, the crosstown agreement can only occur with a high school that does not have a program.
Okay. Well, if we were losing our program, let's say.
If our program was lost, and we're trying to take the optimistic route, then we would have to explore what options exist for our kids. And whether it could or couldn't, it would probably be similar to this type of arrangement.
Okay. Thank you.
On the liability issue, bringing the Mars kids here, is that covered in the MOA?
It is. We've talked about, so from an insurance perspective, we're fine as we've considered this. From a disciplinary perspective, that's addressed here as well, if something occurs while they're here. And the example that we discussed, with Mars, the schools are very used to sending students to shared spaces. Beatty would be a great example. Beatty has students from so many sending schools, and as we go to that, we have an agreement. That's the way that school is structured. We have disciplinary things, and we work between administration to address that.
I have one other question. As far as the after-school activities, like the cadets do a lot here, football games, things like that. That would just be the Pine-Richland cadets here, and would Mars do their own if they wanted to? Because I believe that the instructors are involved in that as well, are they not?
The hardest thing to get, a Mars student will be a Pine-Richland cadet. A Mars student involved in ROTC will be a Pine-Richland cadet. They will have every opportunity to be on a drill team, to work parking at a football game, if that's what you know, as an example. They would have the same opportunities to do that as our cadets do. For all intents and purposes, they are a Pine-Richland student in their role as cadet.
The Pine-Richland cadets could participate in some service opportunities within Mars Area School District, but that would be the Pine-Richland cadets. We're made up of Mars and Pine-Richland students.
And that may be a draw. And certainly for the Mars board, Major Morrison spoke about that, about how they definitely understand they have a role in the community and they have a visibility and want to bring that to the Mars community as well. I have so just an observation, and I understand on the cost, incrementally, the additional students from Mars there's no incremental cost. Of course, incremental costs in education are kind of funny because there's almost never any incremental cost to one student, but $4,500 later, we've got an $80 million budget. I'm comfortable with this as it is right now, and I think I agree in years future, if we get to a stable population, I would want to reassess that, and so I've tried to ask Dr. Miller and informally let Mars understand that as well, that in the long run, if we reach some sort of stable balance where we might want to address some of those shared costs in the long run, I would be interested in doing that, or at least communicating that we might want to do that without changing the nature of this agreement at all.
Yeah, and I did communicate with Dr. Shipley about that specifically, and he agreed that that would be appropriate and important to open that conversation. But right now, there's just hypotheticals. We just don't know what type of interest. Could be 1. We're hoping it's 31, but we'll see as we get into it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Before we move to finance, and Ms. Williams, correct me if I'm wrong, so this is a planning meeting. We do occasionally have items that come up for vote that are timely as this did. There are no more voting items on our agenda this evening, or do we have one? Did you slip one in later?
Nope, just this one.
Okay, so there are no more voting items, so as you're going through, and we have some new committee chair heads, so as you're going through the agenda, I think everything from here down to board business are informational items that'll be for voting at our voting meeting in 2 weeks. With that, Mr. Kashani, could you take us through finance?
Happy to. So 4.01, at the regular meeting, we will have a motion to approve financial reports dated January 31st and accounts payable dated February 19th, as well as paid accounts. 4.02 will be to approve some budget transfers in the amount of a little over 110,000. 4.03 will be a motion to authorize a transfer of some money from the next tier money market account in the general fund to the PNC governmental checking account in the general fund. And Dana, would you like to explain why?
Each month for the voting agenda, you receive a very long list of financial reports, and in there, one of the documents that you receive is an investment listing. Whenever you review the details of the investment listing, you'll see the different dollar amounts and the interest rates that we have those funds invested in. Essentially, what happens is at the beginning of the year, we do some laddered investments so that throughout the year we're kind of entering into those investments in the July, August, September timeframe, and then we create kind of a laddered schedule. With each of those maturities, they kind of come due throughout the winter, spring timeframe to pay for payroll, health insurance, and debt payments. This is being recommended because in this money market account, we do have a good amount of money sitting in there, and we have a March 1st debt payment. So it's my recommendation to pull from this versus one of our Pliget accounts or one of our, it's called PSDLAF. It's the liquid asset fund for the state. This is primarily, I'm recommending this because it's the lower interest rate than we're able to get with some of those other liquid funds through kind of a municipal structure.
Thank you. Item 4.04 will be a motion to authorize the reinvestment of funds in a CD with Farmers National Bank of Emlenton. 4.05 will be a motion to approve the 2018-2019 AIU Program of Services budget. And the administration is recommending that we do approve the budget as presented. And 4.06 is a reminder of some upcoming Finance Committee meetings, February 19th, April 16th, and then one in May that has yet to be scheduled.
Ms. Kirk, just one question back on the CD. Those are through the P-Legit program. Don't they usually keep us under 250,000? So I know on the list of investments, we just have all those 249s and 248s.
Yes. So when we first entered into a money market investment with Farmers National, attached to that board agenda item is also a letter of collateral. So essentially what we did was we entered into the letter of collateral with Farmers National to cover not only the money market account, but also this small investment. So in terms of their FDIC insurance, we're actually covered in excess because of that collateralized letter as well.
I remember that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
Doctor?
I just have one question. So we say that we will schedule the May meeting at a later time. Do we want to, when do we want to do that?
How about we, just as a thought, why don't we get to our February committee meeting, and then at that time make a
Decide.
determination?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kashani.
You're welcome.
Dr. Meyer, could you walk us through academic achievement?
Sure. 5.01, Classroom Diagnostic Tools, CDT. Currently, the high school and the middle school are 7th and 8th grade mathematics and science grades 7 through 10 Keystone. We have these diagnostic tools in all these grades. And these assessments provide teachers and students with individual and group strengths, needs to guide targeted instruction. Questions are aligned with PA Common Core, assessment anchors, and eligible content, which were used in the development of the Pine-Richland unit-based curriculum. The Pine-Richland Growth and Achievement Report has identified an area of opportunity for students to grow in 8th grade English language arts. The middle school staff administration will begin administering the CDT assessment to one team in 8th grade ELA students in February. This limited scope will provide teachers and administrations with opportunities to learn about this assessment and will take most students. The measures of the time, stretch, and utility, the amount of time needed to take the assessment, above and below grade level questions, options, uses for staff, students, and families will guide next steps. Currently, 8th grade ELA students participate in classroom-based assessments, for example, quizzes, end of the unit exams, midterms, and final exams. If expanded, the assessment will be given to all students in grade 8 3 times per year, fall, winter, and spring. This implementation is aligned with the Pine-Richland Schools District Key Strategic Initiative of Common Assessment and Data Analysis shared during the academic achievement and growth. All information and communication will be distributed to the parents of students in the selected team after the February 5th board meeting and prior to the first assessment. Any questions? And only thing else I have?
I was trying to figure out the way to word it first. So how would you contrast? A lot of the language there and the uses sound very similar to things we were talking about for common assessments.
Right.
So how would you contrast the expected use of expanding our use of CDT in ELA, and how would you compare and contrast that with the work that's being done on common assessments, just to help me understand better?
I'd say it's it's aligned to where we want to go with common assessments. That doesn't, at this point now, as Dr. Meyer said, in an 8th grade ELA class, perhaps the midterm exam is a common assessment, but in order for us to assess student progress more periodically, in this case 3 times a year, we need some additional resources. So something like CDT, in addition to what we talked about earlier, unit-based common assessments, are just additional opportunities to gather common information and then make those recommendations. So this initiative here aligns with one of our short-term strategic goals, which is looking at those universal screeners, the STAR 360 and whatnot that we have in K through 7 right now. One of the goals this year is to look at how we're assessing students at secondary level. And looking across grades 7 through the high school, there's a gap here in ELA 8, and we have a desire to again benchmark or use this diagnostic assessment over the course of the year earlier on, so we can have teachers share that information. The concept of having one team to go through this process before we would integrate it across all of the 8th grade students is ELA assessment perhaps takes a little bit longer, and we want to see how much time that takes for an 8th grade student to complete that assessment. When we used this assessment a few years back at Eden Hall, it took the equivalent to about 2 class periods, which is significant. And if we're going to ask for that amount of time, we want to make sure it's a good utility and stretch. That's those 3 components we've talked about in the past. CDT has done that for us in science and mathematics, and we think we can accomplish that in ELA too.
And we're focusing on grade 8. I want to highlight, because that's an area of focus that came out of the Growth and Achievement Report.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm, try to wrap your head around this more, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, our midterms would be a common assessment, but they're more standards-based. It's like what we're expecting the students to know at this point, where diagnostic assessments kind of delve deeper and look what the child's strengths and weaknesses are. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. So diagnostic, the concept there is that stretch is available for students. So now a student that is ready to go beyond grade level, so questions would go 9th, 10th grade, or students that's not as ready can go down to 7, 6. A benchmark assessment or a midterm is going to stay at that grade level. Diagnostic allows us to move up and down. That's the stretch that we're talking about that you get out of something like CDT.
So is the midterm common to through a subject each teacher, like say at the middle school, that each of those teachers, like in science, are giving the same midterm?
Not across the board yet. In pockets, we have common midterm assessments, but not across the board.
Is that a goal?
That is absolutely a goal.
Okay.
Yes.
Because you talk about it as a common assessment, but
Right.
at this point, it's not a common assessment.
That's correct. Yeah.
But the goal
in
is to
pockets,
make
it is, but not everywhere across the district. Again, that's the value of an assessment that's common. 3 teachers teaching the same course, all those students taking that course. We have there's going to be some individual assessments that happen, and that's good and fine. But when we have those common assessments, that's when we can look at the instruction, we can look at the curriculum and make modifications.
Just since we're on this, model for teaching and learning, curriculum, instruction, assessment. If we were to look down the road a few years, where we would love to see ourselves is with more frequent, common meaning the same, well-written local assessments. If we were at that place where we saw that tight alignment between curriculum instruction and the assessments that we craft, then the need for some of these other tools may go away. But it's going to take significant time and work to get to that point. We're just not there yet. So this is a good and appropriate bridge to getting where we want to go.
Thank you all.
Okay. The only thing else we have on the academic achievement is a reminder of upcoming committee meetings. You put a mic in front of me and I can't talk. March 5th, 2018 is academic resources, and April 30th, 2018 is an in-depth program review.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer.
Yep.
Mr. DiTullio.
Item 6.01 is the NRG Curtailment Solutions for Program Delivery Year 2018-19. And at the regular meeting, there will be a motion to approve the addendum for 2018-19 to the Curtailment Services Agreement with NRG. And basically, it's just a one-year addendum to the agreement we've had in place since 2012. And since 2009-10, we've saved about $150,000, ranging from $500 one year to $50,000 another year. I guess it's pretty much going to be the same kind of based on what we need to curtail and when, how much we can save.
Yeah, that's accurate. The other part, one of the low dollar amounts was because they told us to shut it down, and based on the time, that was when I was not here for long, it would have meant shutting down during an active day when children were in school, which I didn't think was in our best interest. So we did not close, and as a result, we didn't get the reimbursement that year. But
And to date, I can tell you that that was the only event that they've ever called since 2009, when we were in the program. So you were lucky enough to experience the one and only event that they ever called.
yeah, my comment was, what is this agreement we're in? Somebody's going to tell us when we're going to shut? No, but it does work out well for the district.
Thank you, Mr. DiTullio. Mr. Campbell, could you tell us what's on tap in student services for our next meeting?
Sure. I just wanted to lead off and congratulate the middle school on a successful run of Once Upon a Mattress. The cast and crew were amazing. Some of us saw those performances. I want to thank all the teachers and parents involved in that. It was really, for a middle school level, a really well-done show. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to lead off with that and thank them for their hard work. So item 7.01 would be the consideration of student officers. So at the next meeting, we'll have a motion to approve the student organizations and officer lists. There's some updates from earlier in the year. Item 7.02 is will be a motion at the next meeting to approve the cost of attendance for the Odyssey of the Mind trip. This would be if the students qualify at the local Moon High School competition. There's two teams, and there would be a follow-up trip that would be costly if they place high enough. So we're approving the funds that if they need that for registration, meals, transportation, and lodging.
So I just wanted to say one thing on that item. I used to be a coach and parent volunteer and a judge and so on in this Odyssey of the Mind. And there was one in the application that Kathy Deal had put in that said that as far as the criteria used, that didn't have that the state has that criteria there. Mm-hmm. But just to let you know that they really are judged on. There's probably like 10 different criteria that they go through for their skit that they perform, between creativity and the acting and the materials used, and it goes on and so it's very worthwhile, the program.
And I would second that, since I did Odyssey of the Mind as a middle schooler here, and it after about 20 years later, I realized that it was actually my first introduction to engineering, because we actually had to build a structure at the time. There's also a structure we had to build and put weight on it.
Yes.
And it did not realize it was engineering until long after, and I was recollecting. So that was my first Pine-Richland experience in engineering.
Right. So the various areas between.
As well as the problem-solving and creative aspect in the skit.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So definitely a very worthwhile program. Got to work with Brad Oberg actually on that. He was our coach for Odyssey of the Mind, the late Brad Oberg. So highly supportive of that program, in my opinion, and glad to hear there's other support for it. See item 7.03, PA State Geography B trip. So this will be for consideration at our next meeting, a motion to approve student attendance at this event in Harrisburg. And we'd have one student attending representing the district in the Geography B, costing about $500 to the district to represent us there. Item 7.04, we have to update our small games of chance resolution. So we'll have a motion to approve this resolution where our boosters and parent organizations, in order to get their license, have to be recognized and supported by the by the district. So we have a list of the booster clubs and parent organizations that are going to be participating in that, that we will be approving. And Mark, did you want to make some comments on that? I think you expressed some.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. I thought of another one as I was listening to you read that. So why are we being kept in suspense?
So the issue around the small games of chance is that we set a date and approved these in September of 17. Anybody who had submitted their appropriate and policy required information to either the building principals or the athletic office was on that list initially, and you see that list here as an attachment. It was then brought to my attention by the Unified Booster Organization president that additional clubs and organizations had submitted their information and that they were looking to have an updated list. I do not have all of that information as of yet from the specific boosters at the athletic office or the individual buildings. So that's why it's not updated as of yet. I've given them a deadline to provide me with additional names. The principals are aware of this, as is Mr. Shoup in the athletic office, and they are working through to verify that they have all of the appropriate paperwork for those additional organizations.
Which leads to my second question.
Sure.
So I don't notice the Touchdown Club nor the wrestling boosters on this list. So does that mean the small games of chance that I would contend were not small, were not conducted in compliance with board policy?
My understanding is that they did have a small games of chance from the county in order to run those at that time. The county may have issued that, I'm only speculating, I don't know, have issued that based upon their approval from the prior year. So I had asked at that time to verify that they did have a license. Mr. Shoup had indicated to me that he checked with the Touchdown Club and they did have the appropriate licensure on that. I do not know personally about wrestling. I had not seen or heard anything from that organization.
Well,
but we
so-
can verify that.
So county versus us, there's a difference, right? I'm worried about us. This is our policy.
That's correct. That's correct.
So according to our policy, they did this without being in compliance.
They did not. They had not submitted all of the documentation by September 24th.
So if they're on this list in
Yep.
2 weeks
Yep.
and we don't approve it, what happens?
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know what happens.
Okay, well, we're going
Sure.
to maybe find out.
Okay.
I don't approve of how they conducted, especially the Touchdown Club, actually both, because I had a middle school football player as well as a wrestler, and the way they handled those doesn't sit well with me.
Okay. I will say I was not aware of those. I did, whenever the Touchdown Club was running theirs, I did check with Mr. Shoup to ensure that they had a small games of chance license, and at that time he did indicate that they had one during the football season. So.
Okay. I'd like to know who thought of the idea to have a 13-year-old sell $50 tickets, require them to sell 5 of them, plus $20 RAM cards, 6 each, $370 total. And the wrestling boosters made each parent cut the check in advance, whether or not the kid sold them or not. It's not the spirit of small games.
Well, and I would say that those items that you just said, as far as those, would not necessarily fall under the issue of small games of chance.
What would they fall under?
It's a fundraising issue at that point, so we would have to look at that, and we can clearly look at that after the meeting.
Well, isn't the point of
for more
small
information.
games to raise money?
It depends upon the process and the vehicle in which you do that. For
Okay.
instance, if there is no, as an example, if an organization had a fundraiser where they had a silent auction, for instance, had baskets and other things, and there was a list of things, and people could write down donations or vote to get the items that were up for auction. That is not considered a small game of chance because there's no chance involved. Everybody knows the items and what their values are and what the last bids were and how those are conducted. So those are not considered a small game of chance. You actually have to have a chance involved.
Okay, well,
So
for
if
example,
you're
the
selling a
tickets for
RAM
the
card, that
50
would not be, selling of a RAM card would not be a small game.
But tickets for $50 each that were tied to the PA Daily Lottery, game
That
of
would
chance. That's right.
Again, I don't have all the details, but we'll.
I just think,
absolutely-
it doesn't, I just think that both of those organizations have gotten out of control with how they raise money. It's my first experience as a parent, so it's just interesting to me that this is coming up now, and we have to approve it retro.
Mhm.
You don't always have the benefit.
I think what Mark's touching on is something that ties to policy 915, and it's what he's saying is depicting what's actually happening. I believe that goes against the policy that we initiated because there was certain things that you could not require. You know, that was very specific, and it was very specific because of certain organizations. I know we're getting off on a tangent here,
Yeah.
Right.
but we passed that 915 after a lot of debate.
We did.
Because there was a lot of abuse going on. So if that's still going on, that needs to be something that I think we tear down in the committee. And then we talk about suspensions or possible disciplines to some of these organizations. Because if we're going to be part of an umbrella group, and we're going to have an umbrella group, and we're going to pass a policy on it, we've got to start putting teeth to some of these policies. And I do know that it happened for years because there was this gray, unclear area. I think we clarified a lot of that, and it's I hadn't seen this year, but so that's disheartening to me because 915
Yeah.
was pretty near and dear to me. So I think that's something that needs to be talked about in a committee.
Yeah,
which committee
why don't we,
that's student.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we first have Mr. Kenny and Dr. Pasquinelli get information. That may include reaching out to you for specific experiences and how something was portrayed or communicated to you in your role as a parent. And let them organize that information, look specifically at what it is, whether it ties into this concept of small games of chance or to 915, and if so, how, or if it's fundraising and whether it was required, not required, encouraged, strongly encouraged, all of those details, and then we'll bring that information back to the board as soon as we know it's accurate. And I agree with Mr. DiTullio, depending on what we find, committee may be the next place for discussion, but certainly we'll have more information before the next board meeting.
Also, per Mark's concern, I'd like to know what small games, like what number-wise, what's the size of that considered
So
small
we
game?
can pull, there are restrictions, and again, this, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was the Wild West everywhere. It remains the Wild West most places in terms of how money and 50-50 raffles and basket raffles, we are, again, to my knowledge, even if we aren't perfect, we are as tightly aligned to the rules and regulations that exist as any public school district that I'm aware of. So I don't doubt for a second that we may have issues. I don't know the answer, and we need to, before we do anything else, get the information, make sure we understand what's going on, and then figure out the next steps. But when it comes to operating within requirements, we, Pine-Richland, have taken significant steps in the last few years after a lot of discussion. And there are some difficult questions around fundraising, let me say that, at the highest level of the umbrella. There are significant questions that exist about what is necessary versus what is extra. And there are as many opinions about that as there are people involved in an organization. I do not disagree for 1 second that we need to remember our K-12 scholastic setting as we consider all of these things. And if that means recalibrating and regrounding, then I'm all for those discussions, and I think those discussions should appropriately be representative of our community, and that means working through that. But in the short term, I think that's what you need, correct, Mr. Kenny? Some time to get
Yeah, we'll have to
information.
talk to
and-
Mr. Shoup, but we'll have to talk to the building principals as well, see if there's anything else out there from a PTO perspective, or at the high school level, if there's anything from any of the other clubs and organizations that are non-athletic related as to their fundraising, anything that is on the radar that we were not aware of, so.
Thank you.
As far as the small, your answer, I can get you the regulations on that.
Okay.
As to
Yeah,
what-
I'm just curious, I don't know anything about the
Sure.
statute or.
Yeah,
the
there are
county
thresholds as to what
regulations.
you can take in a 50/50, for instance, and those kind of things. I can get you that.
We'll get them for everybody, and we'll attach them to this item when it becomes public at the next board meeting, so that everybody can see it.
To be clear also, Mr. Kennedy, if you can clarify, we are not issuing the small games of chance license.
That is correct.
And what
We're-
our policy, so what our policy says is that if you are to have a small games of chance event or something involving that taking place on our facilities, that we have to approve. So I think that's.
Right, the county requires
issues
that
the
you be
license,
an
right.
approved booster organization in order to receive a license to run a small game of chance.
Right.
So we would recognize them as one of our organizations. Then the county would determine
License.
whether or not they get a license.
So policy 915 for those who know is a good one to read in advance of this conversation, especially for our new board members.
All right, and then final item under student services, 7.05 is a memorandum of under agreement with CCAC. So for board consideration at our next meeting, we will have a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement with the Community College of Allegheny County that includes the dates executed by each party and continue until terminated. And basically, it's an agreement to pass information for students that are dual enrollment between Pine-Richland and CCAC to have information come back to Pine-Richland about their performance and grades.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Ms. Goebel, will you take it through staff services, please?
Item 8.01, will be presented with a motion to approve a list of personnel items at our next meeting. And 8.02 is a motion to approve the Pine-Richland School District amended 403B plan, and that's listed below. No, that's retroactive to January. Again, we're voting after the fact.
We can double team that. You want to talk about the retro side?
We have been trying to work with PennServe for a period of time in trying to get some of these changes through. They've actually been in process on their end, PennServe's end, of getting all of the documentation written. There were multiple conference calls and those types of things. So it's something that we reached out to them and asked them for in December. Again, their documents, they're dating back to January. It doesn't necessarily change much because really the 403B limits are more calendar year anyway. So the only time it would really be kind of a crunch in terms of the actual limits and such for an employee would be at the end of a calendar year.
Yeah, and any of the additional contributions that we would be allowed to do under the new and revised 403B plan as far as employer contributions and the like, we would not have been able to do those prior. So the time really between January 1, even though it says retro to January 1, there's really no monies involved between January 1 and when we pass this that we have input into the plans that the board was unaware of or anything.
What, are you
along those
just
lines.
accruing funds or something? Or?
No, what this really is this would be like employee withholdings. So
Oh.
for instance, if an employee wanted to invest in a 403B, it's very similar to a 401K.
Okay.
They have to opt into that,
Right.
and they have to actually set up an agreement directly with a financial advisor. So as Mr. Kenny indicated, nobody has entered into any of these additional items, basically. But what we would be doing is offering these additional investment
So
vehicles.
it's a future offering?
Correct.
Okay.
It just reflects essentially a calendar year under the IRS regulations.
So you're not going to go back and allow
No.
the makeup time on the money or anything? Okay,
No.
all
Not
right,
at
now
all.
I understand. All right, thank you. 8.03, there'll be a motion presented to approve the Pine-Richland School District 57B elective deferred compensation plan, and it's outlined below, and that again is retroactive to January 1st of 2018. 8.04 would be a motion to approve first reading of policy 808 food services, and that's listed below as well for everyone to read. And 8.05 is a motion to approve the first reading of 819 suicide awareness, prevention, and response. It's attached below as well, and I encourage everyone to read that. 8.06, let's see, so this is Oh, okay, so this is procurement attachment to policy 626, federal fiscal compliance, and this refers back to competitive bidding thresholds. And I don't know, Dana, do you want to add anything that we should focus on or read more about?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
This is something where in the committee meeting, we were referencing written quotation limits and bid limits. For many, many, many years, the quotation limit was at $4,000 and the bid limit was at $10,000. A few years ago, the Department of Labor basically said that they would increase each of those limits each year. So the increase actually happens every year in January. We don't necessarily have to have approval of this attachment, but we want to make sure that the attachment in our board policy reflects the true new limits as of January 1 of this year.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then 8.07 is a review and a reminder of staff service committee meetings, and the staff service committee met earlier before our 7 p.m. meeting, and we reviewed the remaining 100 policies, more specifically 4 policies that were pulled from the original batch last year, and we made progress and had productive discussion, and I think we know what we need to do for our next meeting, and I'm sure, do you want to speak to any more about that, or?
No, again,
Okay.
we just reviewed, non-discrimination,
Resources, homework.
Resources, homework, and Title
so they
I.
will be brought forward to the board as an information item on the 19th, so that everybody can review those before they start to go into the cyclical process of the 3 reads for adoption purposes.
And then also, too, we discussed the facility signage for public use of the school grounds during school hours, and we pretty much all decided that it was in the best interest, considering especially with some of the challenges we faced more recently, eliminating any distraction or additional activity on the campuses while the students are actively engaged in academic or, I guess, extracurricular activities as well. So I don't know if there's any more that needs added. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Ms. Goble. Mr. Moy, Operational Services, please.
Item 9.01, 2018-2019 meal prices. This is going to be a motion to establish the following meal prices for 2018 and 2019 as presented below. The paid lunch equity tool is still being built by the USDA, so these are going to be calculated in the future. Questions?
Yeah, if we could, now we bolded what we thought was the clearest way to describe this, but that the equity tool is designed to ensure, and we see that in the bold, that when we get federal subsidies, those are being used to support the free and reduced, students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and are instead not being used to subsidize those with the ability to pay. So that's the crux of the whole concept, and because we don't have that tool at this point, we cannot make a recommendation around lunch prices.
Correct. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to provide you with the information so that you could see it, so you can kind of understand what will be coming. Mrs. Bucknam did provide the school breakfast price comparison and the lunch price comparison as well, so that at least in the time being, while we're waiting for USDA to release the price equity tool, you at least can kind of see where's our pricing currently in the current year versus neighboring districts. Again, we feel pretty comfortable that over time that we're going to need to increase the breakfast price. That's not mandated by the price tool, but lunch will be. So we just have to kind of go through that calculation and see where our weighted lunch price is. We were contemplating doing it, but when we contacted PDE and USDA, it should be out hopefully next month.
Item 9.02, replacement of cafeteria tables. This will be in the February meeting. A motion to approve the replacement of the cafeteria tables for Wexford Elementary from PEMCO through the CoStars program as attached.
I just want to inform the board that I intend to recuse myself from voting on this item. My brother-in-law is the part owner of that company. It's unusual that this would be my second board meeting and this would come up. So So I have no interest in this company, but just want to make sure there's no conflict of interest.
Big contract.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Moy. Item 10, board business. As I assume all of you are on PSBA's radar, your Pine-Richland.org emails, so you should have received some information already regarding PSBA's advocacy in opposition to Senate Bill 2. Dr. Meyer has brought this to our agenda as our PSBA legislative representative. So I will turn it over to Dr. Meyer to give us some background on that. So there is nothing on our agenda or even necessarily on the voting agenda to vote on yet. So this is where we plan, and if one of the outcomes of our discussion is we want to discuss further and hold a vote on such a resolution, we would do so at the voting meeting on February 19th.
So Ms. Miller posted the resolution for everybody, and I hope you had a chance to look at it, but I'm going to give some history on this, and then we can ask a discussion. There has been several movements and motions at the state level to approve essentially it's tax-based, and you can do a student savings account that would go towards vouchers. Then those monies saved from vouchers money would come from the state and would come out of Pine-Richland's budget, okay? This is very similar to what has been done in Florida. And I spent a good portion of this morning, I actually talked to Peter, digging around and doing some research on this. And it's a lot of mixed reviews. And I'm working really hard to try to find some nonpartisan information for you to look at. It's also a very partisan topic. Long and short of it, basically, the state school board is saying that compared to other school systems, Pennsylvania does very well with our public schools. We have high standards, that our students are being successful, and that they are not supporting this legislation. So if you have questions, like I said, I did some research. I looked at some stuff in Milwaukee where this has happened. It's not showing one way or the other that it's effective or not effective. So it's basically the idea of taking monies from public school when we don't know what the outcomes are.
I'll provide an additional piece of background, and it only occurred to me now, Carla. I was at a board president's forum down at Beatty earlier this week, and one of the during some open roundtable discussion, somebody really pinned down the PSBA rep and said, "Hey, tell me your position on Senate Bill 2. How can you, how do you explain this and this?" And really, like, the answer, and it wasn't what I expected, and what the PSBA representative said was, this is not PSBA's position on Senate Bill 2. This is the position of the Pennsylvania School Board Association adopted legislative agenda. So I want to give that by way of background as well, that we have a legislative conference in Hershey every year. I've attended for the past couple of years. Dr. Meyer, your predecessor, has attended, and we canvass and we vote and we discuss. And so the PSBA definitely has an agenda.
Yeah.
It's not PSBA's agenda per se. It is the agenda of their membership. Opposition to this bill falls squarely within that platform. So I think that's important also to understand where the genesis is, and that how does PSBA sort of come off sending these out. So
I'd also like to say, because I looked at this, and not just this, I went on to I think that providing links is what I should say, to the bill itself, to be able to read it. That's probably the most unbiased, is just reading the bill itself. And if you, from the government website, then you have access to whatever information that you want that's directly, who's sponsoring it, that type of thing. But also just what the bill says. PSBA also has more than just this. There is some other information on there.
I went to their website today. There are links or things like that. There was nothing actually you could download. It was all linked type things. So I don't know, Barb, if I can send you links or things to share with people to look at. But there is stuff available on the PSBA website that you can read. One of the things I referenced, the Milwaukee piece, was on the PSBA website as well. So yeah, you can see, if you go to the bill, you can see who is sponsoring it. You can see, you know, the history. I would recommend looking at the past versions of the bill as well. Like I said, this is not the first time this has been introduced. It's been introduced numerous times. And I do also, you know, encourage you to look at data from other places where this has been tried. So I'll leave it at that. And I have some call-ins from people at the state level that I made this morning, and a colleague in Florida to see if I can get some data for you.
So would it be, I don't know if I'd say helpful, but to know what other, I mean, you can go online and just do a search engine and see there are a few districts in the area who've signed this letter already and have it on their website. I don't know if that's important for anyone to see, or just let anyone, you know, let board members search for that, the information that they want themselves, or do we?
PSBA, so one thing we can do, and if we decide to discuss further in February, is we'll get an updated list to the minute that day from PSBA. And they will, those of you who are getting the PA Daily Edition, chances are, you're getting that 12 hours after that board passes it, because they find it timely and that's part of their agenda. So, yeah, we can definitely collect that as well.
So on the surface, what I like about this, not opposing it, but supporting it, is that it seems to give parents choice, right? And it actually would hold districts who aren't performing accountable to losing students to districts that are. You know, you could live in, you know, it breaks down the geographic boundaries, perhaps. And again, that might be a utopian view of it, but so I just, as a sort of a, perhaps you might say devil's advocate, but I see it that way, just at a very high level. I think that's interesting. I would like the freedom to live where I want to live and send my kids to school without having to pay private tuition.
I think there's that was where there's a couple of issues with that. And I think that it is appealing and gives that idea of choice, and it does to a certain extent.
Right.
But there's a couple of things I'd say about it. So first of all, the criteria for those who are going to open an educational savings account includes any parent of a child enrolling in first grade or kindergarten, period, regardless. So this is not just a tool to help somebody in a low-performing school district.
Right.
Anybody, the parent of a kindergartner right now in our district, who said, well, I'm going to go to kindergarten because kindergarten's really good and I'll take the free kindergarten, but I know I'm going to transfer them to a parochial school or a private school in first grade, would be able to take the tax dollars that's associated with their child, or some proportional share based probably on our weighted average daily membership, and it would go with that child. Maybe that's okay, maybe not, but let me go further. There is a lower performing school, district provision. So a parent of a child in a school that's ranked in the lowest 15% of the school's designation, based on combined mathematics and reading scores from the annual assessment, and presumably we're talking about the PSSAs here. And I guess what I have a problem with in that, Mark, is that we know, in education, it's widely known that performance on standardized tests is well associated with, your economic strata. So we have severe pockets of poverty in Pennsylvania, and they could be urban settings, they could be rural settings. That's where my 15% of my lowest performing reading and math scores are going to be. They're not even taking the growth measures, which we know, hey, you can be low performing, but are you achieving growth? So, if I'm a teacher, do I want to go to a school that's in the lowest 15%? Even if I can get those kids to achieve more growth than our children are, you move them from 5% to 10%, which our kids aren't doing, but you're still a low performing school. That's not a low performing school. Those are low performing communities. That's not a low performing school. Those teachers could be doing a better job than we're doing, a better job than the charter schools or parochial schools that may be seeing this catch. But there's no accountability to say, hey, you can take the money if there's a better school, and we're going to use these criteria to evaluate that school. We're going to establish these governance procedures for how that money is spent. This is taxpayer dollars. This isn't the parents' dollars. None of that exists. None of that's in place in this bill. There are charter and voucher programs that have had success. Across the board, they're not, so to say choice is a good thing, I don't know that I believe choice is a value in of itself, if choice leads to better quality. And that's mixed. I do know that where, or at least in my opinion, where choice has led to better quality, it's accompanied by standards, governance, oversight. And the one consistent criticism of Pennsylvania's efforts to increase choice is that they lack that. So I think it's more complicated. It's sort of easy to say, well, if you're in a lousy school district, wouldn't you want that parent to be able to pull them out? But unfortunately, this is a little more expansive. And so think about that district again. Think about that school, that elementary school, that you have teachers and administrators tackling that challenge of educating kids who are in the bottom 10%. Somebody's in the bottom 15% in Pennsylvania. There always is. There's a bottom 15% in the state. We have 500 school districts. So I'm in there bringing kids who are coming in the door with that endowment, that lack of resources, background, pre-K education, and I'm moving them along, and I'm doing a great job. And I'm moving them along from the bottom 5% to the bottom 10%, and now I'm a low-performing school. That baffles me. It really does. I mean, so I think the word ham-fisted comes to mind, because it seems very, it's one of these. There's not a lot of nuance there. And furthermore, there's that one provision that just says anybody enrolling in K or first grade can pull their kid. I don't know that choice is always better. Our public schools are our civic identity. It's something that comes up every time we talk to the supervisors and annually, at Richland and at Pine Township. They build this community, they build the roads, and that's why you see houses and plans going up. But we recognize we have a mutual role, and they recognize our enhanced role in identifying the identity, because people may live in Richland Township, but they say they're from Pine-Richland, and that's a reference to our school district. So I think something that unilaterally and would apply to parents in our school district gives the option to sort of break down that common bond where we come together and pull those resources. I'm not so sure, and take those resources out of public oversight. Because I operate under a very, very high degree of public oversight and accountability in this room. And that money is going to go poof. You're not going to see those meetings 2 times a month on local access. You're not going to have the ability to vote off the guys who are using it, spending it wisely or not, every 2 years, as we do now. So I think that I'm trying to explain why PSBA comes off as anti-choice in this, but I think there's some nuanced reasoning behind the opposition of that bill.
And I also think it's not just about choice. It's about choice on an equal playing field. Private schools are not required to accept all students. Our parochial schools in Pittsburgh contract with the IU because they do not provide special education services. I have a reading specialist who works with me in my reading clinic who works for the IU, who's assigned to a parochial school. They don't have special education there. They don't have to accept special education students. So are we measuring, when we're talking about success and choice, what are we really measuring? Also with that, they don't take the same type of tests. They're not held to the same type of standards that public schools are. Every year, our schools have to take the PSSAs and the Keystones. Your parochial schools do not have to take those. Any religious school does not have to take that. So we have no way of really knowing if they're being as successful as we are, or if we're being successful as they are.
Do they not have state guidelines they have to follow?
Yeah, they have guidelines.
They have
but I don't think
guidelines.
take it-
They have guidelines.
They have to prove that they're being taught. I mean, all students have to be in school.
Fully, they have to be in school,
Right.
but there's not the accountability piece. They don't have to take any sort of assessments.
But they do.
And the bill does require that an assessment be taken, but it doesn't require the same assessment to be taken from one year to the next, so there's not even a way
Well,
from that
I
point to
agree
then.
with, but there are assessments.
There-
They're held accountable.
It's
to
not
meet certain-
developed enough.
Well, and there's that lack of oversight. I mean, if you change assessments every year and the assessments don't measure the same thing, how can you show you're being successful?
Well, I wouldn't know whether they're inconsistent or not, so I'm not going to speak to that, but.
There's a consistency issue, and also with funding. There is no Pennsylvania, like, Peter and I spoke about this. Massachusetts has been fairly successful with this. However, they spend a lot of money on oversight, the state of Massachusetts. Pennsylvania does not spend that money. So there's not going to be the oversight following the money to make sure it's being spent correctly. I have,
So who pays for that if the state doesn't pay for that?
it doesn't happen. There is no,
So
so,
you're talking about back to the parochial school?
yeah, or any even charter schools, like private.
We do pay for charter school.
We do, but parochial, charter, any sort of choice
We're not all
school.
in the same bucket because we pay for charter.
Right.
And we pay for online, and, yeah, so that's a different.
That's a different-
I think we have to break these out into.
Right, but there's no oversight with the private either. Okay? When the money goes to the private schools, they have their, mission and their belief system and what they prioritize at the school, and they choose how they're going to spend that money. And so there's no oversight over the state saying, no, you can't spend this money this way. It has to go towards the schools. Or you can't spend the money this way. It has to go to computers. They can spend how they want. And you have to keep in mind then who they're serving, what students, their demographics look like. Because they ultimately have the choice of accepting who they want to accept and accepting who they don't, or not accepting who they don't want to accept.
Well, I understand, but I can't imagine that we would have to be held accountable for the vouchers to be paid out without some sort of compliance. I mean,
It's not in the bill.
That's how it's set up.
It's not in the bill right now.
well, maybe, but I can't imagine it's going to pass without some sort of regulation associated with it. But, I mean, again, that's speculation.
So I just wanted to say one other thing with Mark, when you had mentioned about going to another, it sounded like another public school in the area, like not in your district but elsewhere. They talk about a participating entity, and it's a non-public school. It's an institution of higher education. It can be a distance learning center, a tutor who is a teacher that's licensed. It doesn't allow, as I read it, for another public school district. If you say, NA is better, I want my child to go there. You can't do that.
Well, I think, personally, the grounds to oppose it, I think, would be another argument. Choice is always good, Peter, I'm sorry. Choice is always better than no choice. And this smacks of too much bureaucracy for me. It's more central control. I think that they're trying to, and redistribution of, perhaps, you might even say, well, I personally like the system we have here to fund public education. This bill would create chaos, which is bad. I like the fact that we have stability, we can plan, we can predict within reason. We would be a district that would aspire, we would set the bar very high regardless, just because of who we have living in our district. And no matter what. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think potentially, the difference between K through 12 and higher ed is the fact that K through 12, we have to live here. We have to live. We can't send kids off to dorms. There's a state system, there's public state system, and there's private that exist in higher ed, right? They coexist. States compete with private, and but the variable that's different is the fact that we have to, we all have to own homes and live with families and kids, parents and kids together in the K through 12 setting. We're not as we don't have the flexibility that that just young adults have in going to live. But I just want to throw that out there just because we wanted to talk about it. I think the concept of choice, though, is attractive to me. If there is some way to craft it, and maybe there's not.
Well, I agree with Mark. I think choice is a good thing, but I don't think we want to go to the wild, wild west where there's absolutely no compliance and no rules, no guidelines. I mean, there has to be something behind this. I mean, here, you're just forced to give money to someone? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's what it is right now, but again, I think choices. And plus, we do support online, and we support homeschooling, and we pay for charter. I mean, we already are paying all that anyway. So for those that want a choice, there's a lot of options out there. So I see it as just one more extension to that. But
I think if the spirit, for example, we know some families that left PR last year because they didn't like what was going on here, right? They sent their kids to North Catholic for the year because they didn't want, and they had to pay that tuition in addition to the property tax, right? They were able to do that. I think if this bill if it was a situation where geographically you lived where you could, like we could choose, we compete with Mars, NA, maybe a few others here, right? So as a parent, right, within a certain radius, if I don't like what PR is doing, I don't want to move, I don't want to uproot my family. But if I had the flexibility to take what I was paying for PR and apply it to NA or Mars, I'd like that choice. But that's not the spirit of this bill, but that would be an interesting concept, right? That would hold the schools that do compete with each other. You think about how people make decisions to live where they live, right? So we're the North Hills of Pittsburgh. And in reality, whether we realize it or not, we're competing for people to move here and build houses here. We in PR are competing with NA and the others, right? Imagine if we did have a voucher system where we could use as tuition, our property taxes go to any one of those schools within a radius that we can get our kids to, right? That would be interesting. That would be an interesting little experiment.
And imagine if I lose 700 kids next year because Mars offers a buyout package to Dr. Miller and his 2 senior administrators and offers them $500,000 guarantee for next year's, which sounds absurd. But this in my business that happens. And the thing is, we can tolerate it because we're dealing in virtual realities. Mike's salivating. But I've got.
He had you at $500,000, didn't he?
Yeah. But now I've got a building that's empty that I'm still paying a mortgage on.
Can I add another layer? Someone works in higher ed. We do have some accountability. I work for a private school, okay? We still have to be middle states accredited, or we are not allowed to get federal loans. So we are still held in the middle states accreditation, as Pine-Richland knows, is time-consuming. We have to show we're meeting standards. We have to show that our students are growing, that our students are ready for the job market. We just don't have that accountability piece built into the K-12 setting yet outside of public schools. It doesn't exist. They do not have to be accredited. It doesn't matter what higher ed university you work for, whether it's Penn State, Duquesne, Robert Morris, we have to be accredited in order to get federal monies. That does not exist in this bill.
Well, the problem there, we're getting off on, but the problem there is federal money.
Okay, translate that to state.
I don't want federal money. That would actually be an interesting experiment to just forget about federal money, living off federal money.
But translate that into state money, because that's what we're talking about here. The money that we would get from the state. And there's no there's no check or balance.
But I just think that there would be just total chaos. You talk about, an empty building, but yet those children have to go somewhere. You can't build a school building overnight.
With this,
and
there'd be
you can't
chaos, yeah.
transfer teachers, and you can't, I mean, plus you can't build a budget. You know, how do you function on a budget?
Right.
Or how do you, like I said, how do you build that budget? How do you, I think the effort needs to go into, like what happens here, the processes in the lower performing and helping them. It's not taking away the money, and it's not taking away the
Lower-performing colleges have to either perform or their buildings are empty, or they have to make some sort of incentive to fill those buildings. So, I mean.
But we
again,
turn away students, though.
There's holes in this bill, there's no doubt about it. But again, the choice, the fact that we talk about these dollars, I think Peter said that it's not the parents' dollars, it is the parents' dollars. That's fundamentally the difference that I have. That's why I like the aspect of choice, because it's my money. And when somebody else is taking it and not allowing me to do what I want with it, I have an issue with that. That's a fundamental thing. That's me. Some people aren't wired that way, but that's me personally. So I think it would create, if done correctly, which I don't necessarily think this one does, if done correctly, it would create a competition, right? And why somebody sends their kid to whatever school. You know, my kid wanted to go to IUP. Is it the best school in the world? Maybe, maybe not for him. It's the school, right? If a parent, for whatever reason, said, I don't want my kid to go to Pine-Richland because I don't like their science program, I would think that they're crazy, but okay, they wanted to go to NA. I don't have an issue with that, right? I think we as a school, again, if the bill's done right, the way that we're doing business, we wouldn't have empty halls. We'd be talking about we need to build more halls. And people would be coming, because if we build it, they would come to this district. So I think a bill done the right way would benefit PR, and we would be a staple. We would be a school people talk about, because we are now. So I think it would benefit us. Other schools, not so much. So again, there's definitely flaws. I understand what they're trying to do. They want to try to take a step. I just think it might not be the right step right now.
Yeah,
So did we want to, I'm sorry, Dr. Kim, did we want to, I mean, is it important for us as a board to adopt this resolution? And do we want to do that? Is that really now, I mean, is that the?
That is the question. I'd
That's
say
the question.
first, what I do believe sincerely and strongly is that it's important for us as a board to take time occasionally and discuss these matters. So I know that, so thank you. And we can, if we wish to move it forward, continue this discussion at the next meeting. So, yeah, I mean, we can do it simply as a straw poll. If there is very little interest in continuing the discussion and putting this resolution on the voting agenda, we will not. If there's sufficient interest, and it may be because you're opposed and you want the opportunity to speak publicly in support of this bill, so I want to see the resolution, then we would. So I guess I can kind of poll, you know, does anybody have no interest in this coming? Because I'm seeing some interest, so.
I'm for putting it up for a motion, and I would support opposing it.
Understood. For putting it up.
I'm for putting up, I just want to make the comment, I don't think we can compare this to colleges, because colleges can turn away students. You know, we have to educate everyone, and there's a whole different dynamic when you have to take everyone with your geography, and even, you know, competing for the best, it's a whole different dynamic. Also, it's draining, you know, public money into private resources that the public can't access. We debated before this meeting about how to keep the track at Richland accessible to the public. Our library's open after hours. If we're diverting money to private schools, are we allowed to use the track at North Catholic, at Shadyside? Are we allowed to use resources there? You know, if it's a private school, we don't have the public access from public tax dollars.
All right, so we'll put the motion, move the motion for the resolution forward for a vote. Thank you all.
Yeah, and thanks for having it on as a topic.
11.01, we do not have any reports. I'm going to assume we have no visitors to recognize. We already know you, Ms. Buckman. So the board will adjourn to an executive session at this time to discuss a personnel matter. Have a good night, everyone.